Of course, we know very well contributions, including the monograph Tanois Fosini, Poeti, Vaganti, Intellettuali e Musici del periodo ellenistico, Volume 1, Delo e le Cicladi, which was awarded in the 6th edition of the Giancarlo Susini Prize, promoted by Epigraphica. And she is currently preparing, this should be said, the second volume of the project, focused on itinerant cultural expression of the Hellenistic period, attested at the Sanctuary of Delphi. And okay, so I give you the floor, and today she is going to talk about vocal technique and singing practice, the vices and virtues of performance in the Greco-Roman world.
Thank you, Massimo, for this so generous presentation. And I am deeply grateful to Daniele and Massimo. Can you hear me right? Yeah. To Daniele and Massimo for organizing so beautiful the MOISA seminars in Lecce and for our stay in such an extraordinary place. For my contribution today, I would like to turn to the voice as intended in singing style. And I look forward to discussing with you afterwards. I am sure that many of you have seen the movie Florence about the wealthy heiress Florence Foster Jenkins with a passion for opera and who funded performances and artists despite famously poor singing skills. Watching it, especially Meryl Streep's brilliant portrayal, I found myself laughing, but also feeling a bit embarrassed for her. Her singing is so off-key and awkward, and it's at once funny but uncomfortable. That got me wondering what exactly makes a voice sound off or unpleasant to our ears. Which elements turn a vocal performance from enjoyable to unsettling. And so this blend of humor and unease sparked my curiosity about vocal defects and anomalies more broadly. And I then brought these questions back to my zone of comfort, of course, the ancient world. And I started wondering what features made a singing style displeasing and out of place in their experience. How ancient audiences might have reacted to similar vocal flows. So from these questions, my study takes shape using a modern spark to explore how singing style and its imperfections were understood and judged in the ancient world. This centrality of vocal expression in ancient music emerges as entirely natural when its function as the primary expressive medium is properly acknowledged, acting as the vital link between instrumental accompaniment and the choreotic dimension. Massimo showed in these days that with its unlimited range of nuances in timbre and sound, the human voice was regarded as by the ancients as an instrument in its own right, endowed with a natural perfection. Although never formally included among the organa, the voice was in fact treated as such by ancient music theorists, who defined its range and developed methods of technical training. Beginning with Aristophanes, the inquiry into types of vocal emission, spoken and sung, and into the nature of song as structured by intervallic motion, gave rise to a theoretical and physiological discourse on the voice. The loss of technical treatises specifically devoted to singing voice can to some extent be compensated by evidence drawn from medical, musical, and philosophical literature. A variety of literary And also some epigraphic sources offers valuable glimpses into musical life and provides significant insights into vocal practice. The stylistic development of lyric and dramatic poetry unfolded in tandem with advances in melopoeia, and the artistic evolution closely mirrored progress in vocal technique. The attainment of a high degree of professionalization fostered in the Greco-Roman world a rich discourse on vocal practice within both musical and dramatic contexts. Literary and technical sources that attest to the role of phonascos, as well as to prescribed regimens of lifestyle and vocal training, reflect an increasing specialization in the act of singing. Such professionalism presupposed a heightened awareness of what should never be audible to the listener, whether due to deviations from the harmonic structure caused by deficiencies in technique, or to a broader inadequacy in performance. The ability to manage the voice correctly and effectively is an essential quality for anyone engaging in singing. Yet, not all performers live up to this expectation, also nowadays. The experience of listening to a vocal performance involves numerous factors that may draw to the listener's attention in both positive and negative ways. In assessing a singer's abilities, technical skills play a role, a central role, a focus role. But standards of taste and style also come into play, making any evaluation partly subjective. Among the causes of negative judgment, there is one decisive and unequivocal fault that brings down the guillotine for the performer: the poor intonation. The inability to maintain accurate pitch disrupts the harmonic structure in a way that is immediately perceptible, impairing the quality of performance and making it difficult to enjoy. A lack of sound balance in a singer represents the most serious flaw, though not the only one. Other elements may likewise render a voice unsuitable with respect to the stylistic and aesthetic expectations of the audience, provoking reactions of confusion, embarrassment, or even mockery. Greek literary sources convey a twofold image, either idealized or negative, of figures associated with the musical arts. Depending on the narrative needs, performers are portrayed either in terms of praise, emphasizing their talent or prestige, or in a negative light, stressing their excesses, technical shortcomings, or inappropriate behavior. This oscillation between praise and blame reflects not only the inclinations of individual authors, but also the expectations and cultural trends of their intended audiences. The theme of ineptitude in singing is addressed both in technical treatises focusing on acoustic phenomena in singing and production, and even more significantly in a wide array of literary sources that present an encyclopedia of anecdotes, curiosities, and glimpses into cultural history and daily life. From this body of evidence emerges a recurrent vocabulary. On one hand, it draws on the specialized lexicon of music theory. On the other, it invokes familiar imagery and broader stylistic musical indicators. These sources reveal that within the hierarchy of disappointed expectations, Greek culture articulated with remarkable clarity evaluative parameters regarding vocal style. References to substandard singing chiefly concern keyboards, and to a lesser extent choral ensembles and actors, contexts in which the sung voice constituted the core of the performance and was integrated with other artistic skills. Singing, accompanied by a string instrument, was regarded as the most demanding of musical specialties, as it required the guitar to modulate the voice, paying careful attention to timbre, inflection, and melodic line, while simultaneously managing the instrument with both hands. And two authors in particular, Lucian and Athenaeus, did not refrain from sketching portraits of guitarists who stood out negatively for their lack of vocal ability. The accounts reflect pre-existing cultural conceptions as well as the evolution of musical theory over time. Then there is the discipline of chorea, involved the combination of words, movement, and the music performed by a group. While each of these elements could be emphasized to varying degrees depending on the type of performance, vocal expression always produced a powerful sound impact in articulating the plurality of voices. Choral music, whether lyric or dramatic, emerges in the sources as a paradigmatic model of collective performance, in which the harmony of the whole depends on the precise coordination of the choreography under the guidance of the choreographers. Each voice has to be fully integrated into the ensemble, adhering strictly to the prescribed timing and pitch, so that the final result would be a seamless flow of melody and movement. Any instance of off-pitch singing or failure to follow the tempo and musical intention disrupts the continuity, reducing the performance to a tangle of confusion, the Rossini nodo aggrovigliato, for both eye and ear. And then there is the actor's skill set that had to operate across multiple levels of competence, interpretative ability, choreography movement, and vocal control, both in speech and song. Dramatic areas, which grew progressively in number and complexity, were structured upon intricate musical and rhythmic frameworks, requiring harmonic modulations with a high degree of melodic virtuosity for performers. Beyond the timbre, flexibility, and vocal articulation, one of the most valued traits in dramatic performance, we will see that, was vocal power. Microphonia made an actor unfit to portray imposing characters and could decisively compromise a dramatic career. The aim of our journey today is therefore to analyze stylistic faults of the singing voice as understood in the Greek culture, Greek Roman culture, focusing on the element that undermined melodic rhythmic coherence and the fluidity of musical execution, and on the contexts and reactions associated with such failures. The identification and examination of a specialized vocabulary for vocal errors, especially in relation to intonation, modulation, and rhythmic control, offers a nuanced perspective on ancient vocal style, and by means of a reverse analysis of its flaws, the qualities it was expected to embody. Although this approach leaves aside for the most part the ethical and socio-pedagogical dimensions inherently linked to ancient music, it aims to define the kinds of vocal ineptitude considered intolerable in performance, and to shed light on the critical resource within Greek Roman culture, as well as on its stylistic awareness of what must never occur in a sung execution. But in order to identify the elements of distortion considered capable of compromising a sung performance, it is useful to begin from the opposite end of the spectrum. And so we can start from the voice of Panthea, the idea of perfection. Panthea, concubine of Lucius Verus, as described in both its spoken and sung forms by Lucian in the serves as a paradigmatic model of vocal excellence. When the author turns his attention to the woman singing, he draws on shared points of reference to describe the perception of a sound experience. Lucian's familiarity with empirical modes of observation and listening enables him to depict timbre and vocal color, and in doing so, to outline the parameters of a well-executed vocal performance. Vocality is thus situated in relation to textual articulation, rhythmic control, and instrumental accompaniment. Panthea's tonus to technotos is velvety and seductive, striking the ideal balance between baritonal and high-pitched registers, neither too deep nor too light, ulte balus, ulte panuletos. In the context of chitarodic performance, her singing reveals its superiority in conjunction with the accompaniment of the string instrument. Panthea demonstrates precise rhythmic control. She articulates the melody through the alternation of downbeats and upbeats, and marks the text clearly with the movements of the plectrum. She also handles the instrument perfectly tuned, with delicacy and precision in fingering. Her vocal modulations disdain abrupt warbling, favoring instead smooth and well-prepared melodic transitions. I would like to pose the accent here to this expression, to eucampes ton melon. And it is the modulations that we will see on the reverse for an example of failures. Before her, even the most melodious animals, swans among them, appear clumsy, apanta, amusa, and even Prochnes' rich voice is deemed unskilled, atecmus. Notably, a well-executed song must be accurate in both its melodic line and rhythmic articulation, well matched with instrumental accompaniment and performed with a voice that is rich, polished, and finely modulated. In the figure of Panthea, we find a portrait of the voice, a synthesis of vocal attributes expressed through the shared terminological apparatus, and familiar in nature, not only mythologically, but also drawn from the animal world. These latter analogies, shaped by mimetic associations, align animal sounds with the human voice to illustrate both harmonious melodies, and in this case, unpleasant singing, as we shall see in due course. Thus, while Lucian articulates the technical and expressive profile of the ideal performer, he also outlines the shortcomings and inadequacies of the mediocre singer, invoking a widely shared cultural imagery, a repertoire of typical scenarios, and a well-defined vocabulary. So in the section A of my handout, I included some examples of perfection in singing. Instead, in the part B, all the flaws that I could detect in the singing voice. And so the first one is a very well-known case that Alessandra Magnani knows very well. Is Evangelos from Talenti. And among the vignettes of humanity selected by Lucian's critical eye, the figure of Evangelos stands out. His lack of vocal ability is the central trait of his portrayal. Musically inept, yet burning with ambition to win glory at the pizza contest, Evangelos dares to compete in the musical avant. Misled by obsequious flatterers, he becomes convinced of his triumph and arrives at Delphi in ostentatious splendor, clad in a purple robe, adorned with gold and gemstones, and brandishing a somptuous guitar richly decorated with images of Apollo, Orpheus, and the Muses, an instrument that inspires wonder in all who behold it. Relying on this theatrical display, Evangelos is persuaded he will have no difficulty in securing his victory. Yet, his performance proves disastrous. Discordant sounds, broken strings, and excitant singing provoke the audience love. The judges, infuriated by his arrogance, expel him from the theater in disgrace, and as he is driven off the stage with lashes, he scrambles to retrieve the gemstones fallen from the instrument. What unfolds is a truly deplorable scene here, shaped by the disjunction between what is seen and what is heard. Three separate actions contribute to the portrayal of Evangelos' musical incompetence. He begins with plucking and anacrosis that is disharmonic and rhythmically chaotic. Then he breaks three strings in a single stroke by striking the instrument with excessive force. And he launches into a melody that is both graceless and weak. And so, in short, he lacks the fundamental principles of tonal structure, rhythmic coordination, and the real familiarity with the instrument, and the proper vocal technique. So his melodic line betrays a complete absence of musical taste, and his singing is delivered in a voice both faint and uncertain. And Lucian says, "Aponson ti kai lepton." So Evangelos' voice is weak because it's technically unstable, much like those actors, Lucian tells also this in the Nigrinus, who wear the mask of imposing characters, you see here, imposing characters, and like Agamemnon, Creon, or Heracles, dressed in splendid robes and bearing a proud expression, yet open their mouths only to let out a thin feminine thread of sound. Calmega, che notes micron tepintai, kai isknon kai in voice, as opposed to megaphone, so is connected to the amount of air set into motion, which in turn determines the intensity of the phoneme. So thinness, as contrasted with the thickness of sound, so leptotes as opposed to pacutes, refers to, on the one hand, the physical characteristics of the vocal cords, producing higher or lower pitches, and on the other hand, to the quantity of the pneuma emitted. Thin and delicate voices, such as those of children, women, or certain birds, are not always deemed unpleasant. They are frequently associated with sweetness and pleasantness. At the same time, however, the impression of vocal frailty is often tied to conditions of physical weakness, whether due to illness, fatigue, or poor nourishment. In Evangelos' case, the negative evaluation of leptotes arises from the mismatch between his ostensibly masculine persona and a feeble vocal emission, his china, the vocal reed, being too slender to produce the expected breadth and resonance of a seasoned guitar competing at the Pythian Festival. Lucian's irony targets precisely this mismatch. Tragic actors and figures such as Evangelos came to embody the degeneration of the musical and theatrical tradition, in which the growing spectacularization of performance seems to have favored immediate visual impact over rigorous vocal training. The result of Evangelos' bizarre performance is described as aponsos, a term that denotes not only the absence of theoretical and technical instruction, but also a lack of aesthetic discernment. The reaction of both audience and judges to Evangelos' mediocre musical performance represents the natural response to a paradoxical display. Laugh and lash arise not only for the discomfort provoked by the situation, but also for the inappropriateness generated by the boldness of his behavior. As for the use of the whip at the Adonis, a particularly illuminating parallel, one that pertains specifically to vocal incompetence, is provided by the wit of the Kytharo the Stratomos, around whom Athenaeus collects numerous witty and caustic anecdotes. We see here in this passage that Athenaeus describes the mistakes committed by singers, alums, and Kytharos at the thematic contests at the Panhellenic Festival at Nenea, and by dramatic performers and in the Athenian competitions. So Stratomos mockingly recalls how offenders were chased and beaten on stage by the Massimo forum whenever their performance fell short on the standard demanded by the Agonatheia. This anecdote sharpens our focus on telling nuance in the vocabulary of vocal deficiency, embodied in the verb plemmeleo, commettere una stecca, make a false note. Plemmeleo designates the very opposite of emelia, and therefore clashes with the ordered relationships of pitch and rhythm in instrumental and vocal music. In fact, in the case of some performance, the term pinpoints errors in intonation and rhythmic proportion, as explained in the 19th book of the Pseudo-Aristotelian Problem, especially the questions concerning pitch and out-of-tune voices. Perception of such faults in pitch and rhythm is greater when one sings in the lower register, poi baritone adondes, whereas mistuning occurs most frequently in higher register, epi to oxu apausin oi plesto. This explanation rests on the association of high pitch with a rapid motion and the low pitch with slowness. A grave note propagates more slowly, remaining within the listener's perception for a longer span of time. Another typical response from the listeners faced with a mediocre vocal performance is hilarity, laugh, as a spontaneous reaction of embarrassment that frequently recurs in illusion words. A striking parallel to the Kytharo the Evangelos is found in the serenade offered by the singing Cyclop, in the work, in the dialogues of the Cyclop. And so the Cyclop episode opens up broader perspectives, particularly regarding the intimate association that the Greeks perceived between the human voice and animal sounds. It also helps refine the lexical repertoire available for describing an out-of-tune voice or a performance that is stylistically inappropriate. In the words of Doris, who mocks her daughter Galatea for attracting Polyphemus' attentions, the Cyclops song is described as clumsy and laughable situation. Everything illusions, grotesque construction on the Cyclopean singer is marked by distortion. from his braying, donkey-like singing voice to the dark and bestial instrument that accompanies him. In his attempt at a serenade, the Cyclops is unable to modulate his voice. The result is a bestial performance, screamed aloud, born, and in a hushed timbre, tracheia ode, far removed from the muses and from harmonia, e melodically amusontically apodon, so much so that even Heco refrains from repeating it out of shame. It is worth noting that the same animal comparison to the donkey and the ox, and then onon here, and also brucomeno, no? Which is bellowing, the similar comparison we recall also in the Stratonicos mockery of the Cyclad Cleon in Athenaeus, so the same pair. The association with animal sounds is applied hyperbolically to an already beast-like figure, not the Cyclops, whose flowed song is labeled amusos e apodos. In particular, the adjective apodos is a favorite of Lucian, and it denotes the condition of being out of tune, and it is thus perceived as displeasing in the ears. The term finds apt application in descriptions of animal voices. For instance, the rooster. The rooster is referred as Alectruon apodos, a cock whose song is not apodos, but rather underdeveloped, having never matured into its full sonorous vocabulary. It is faint and toneless. So, in the case of Lucian Cyclops, apodos may describe a breathless, blown-out voice, exhausted by shouting, bone, and over-exertion. A more precise understanding of apodos emerges by when it is paired with the term apekes. And so this double adjective used by Claudio Iano conveys a voice that is both stifled and harsh in the ear. Elian provides significant testimony on animal sound, first, which helps refine the semantic nuances associated with the distortions of the singing voice, while also expanding our lexical repertoire. We need to go to section A, because we have here a passage that Elian draws from Hecateus of Abderas, account of the Hyperboreans, worship of Apollo. And Elian explains the song of the sacred swans by Litotes. The negation of the opposite, and it is a rhetorical device frequently employed here in descriptions of vocal excellence, is here used to enhance representation of the perfect coordination achieved by the swans, as they join the chorus of humans and the instrumental accompaniment. In parallel with the solo singing, idealized in Panthea's model, what emerges here is a vision of choral excellence, which, as we will see, stands in sharp contrast to the examples of mediocrity characteristic of this type of vocal music. So, as if endowed with divine skill and extraordinary musical capacity, swans, they sing without ever producing discordant sounds or diverging from the melodic line. Apekes kai apodon. Of particular interest is the adjective apekes, which Elian uses to describe the phlegma of certain animals, most notably the piercing cry of the Indian pelican, or the voice of the Indian carcason, or also the pigs who fear the elephants, for example. So this association with the animal world, characterized by an untamed use of voice perceived as unpleasant, also reappears in Lucian when he describes, for example, the philosopher Diogenes. Diogenes has a stigma apeces also, because he is depicted as a bestial creature, without manners, with a wild attitude. He is unpleasant, both eye and ear, and his speech, not singing in this case, in the case of Diogenes, but in the case of Diogenes is just the speech. He is harsh. He emits like a dog's bark, which is apeces. So these testimonies describe the sound impression made by either human or animal voices deemed apeces, not simply due to their tonal qualities, but because they offend the listener's sense of acoustic appropriateness. The concept of apecia thus encompasses dissonance in both spoken and sung sound, whether produced by animals or humans. More broadly, the term signifies a deviation from what is perceived, and what is perceived as appropriate or cultivated. By extension, the adjective apeces is also applied to behaviors considered uncultured. And we go back to the B section here, because we have, in this case, a comparison here by a scholar to Aristides. Because the scholar of Aristides here depicts with apeces, with the apecia, a hostile social interaction, and even speech deemed indecorous or socially disruptive. And here, in this case, another recurring device is in place. The scholiast employs metaphor and musical terminology to explain the meaning of a term, apeces, used in a different semantic field. So, in this case, the scholar to Aristides, beyond the notions of melodic rhythmic distortion and the recurrence of amusos, you can see, uses also tracheus, and this is particularly noteworthy. This term, already encountered in Lucian description of the Cyclops song, derives, like Baruch's, from sensory perception, specifically from the tactile domain, and is then transposed into the auditory sphere. In contrast to Lelos, tracheus evokes roughness, and when applied to vocal performance, suggests irregularity in the timbre and hoarseness, thereby prompting an unpleasant perception in the ear. It is worth recalling that Aristotle and his school identified the tracheutes as a vocal anomaly caused by the fragmentation of the percussive frequency in the ear. They described with the trachuteron the change in the male voice at puberty, likening it to strings that are loosened and out of tune. As for amusos, instead, this term, as we have seen, frequently appears in the sources under our examination, and it broadly encompasses the notion of ecstatic decorum, indicating estrangement from the muses, and by extension, insensitivity to the arts. More specifically, amusos denotes both a lack of musicality, tonal perception, or musical education, and the disharmony and dissonance of sounds. Many cases demonstrate the overlap between these two meanings. On the one hand, a general lack of refinement, and on the other hand, a more specific ignorance, inadequacy in musical matters. For example, here in the Locus 1, the parallel here, yes. here we see in this passage of Empedocles, which is quoted by Plutarch, we see the use of amusos referring to the species of fish. They are toneless. The image of the fish returns in the description of another mediocre performer song, in one of the most famous anecdotes concerning the wit of our Cicero the Stratonicus, as we already saw. Athenaeus transmits a rich dossier of such anecdotes, targeting the vocal ineptitude of the Ciceros, unfortunate enough to find Stratonicus among the audience, and who became the object of his biting remarks. In two particular cases, the evocation of animal imagery brings the metaphorical shift from nature sound and forms to the definition of vocal incompetence to full expression. So we see here in the Propides, the fish, the outward appearance that does not always correspond to artistic ability again. Propides of Rhodes is a Cicero with an imposing physical presence, but such a weak voice that he is described as aphoros, voices, like a fish. And so, Stratonicus, that attended a performance by Propides, who thought larger stature, was poor in his art, which fell short of his bodily size. And when people asked Stratonicus how the performer was, he replied, "A poor nobody makes a large fish," implying, first of all, that he was a nobody, but second of all, that he was no good, and in addition, though large, he was a fish in his lack of voice. The anecdote plays ironically on the contrast between the Rhodian Cicero's impressive physique and the fragility of his vocality, a man of great stage presence whose voice, however, fails to meet expectations. So the association to the fish, an animal mute by nature, reinforces the criticism of a vocal incompetence. Yet the aphonia of Propides should not be understood as a total absence of sound, but rather as a faint and therefore unpleasant voice, again, in line with the explanation gives offered us by Dionysius Strax, who correlates the sound produced in the pronunciation of mute consonants with the aphonia of tragodos kakophonos. So the adjective kakophonos thus suggests that the problem lies not in the lack of the sound per se, but in the poor quality of the sound produced, one that is disagreeable to the ear and unsuitable for dramatic art due to a natural disadvantage and the lack of technical skill. In Stratonicus' joke equating the Rhodian Propides with the fish, the noun aphonia appears to be used to indicate a weak and inadequate singing voice, unpleasant and unmusical because it lacks energy. This situation is comparable to the leptotes that we observed in Lucian and in the case of the Wanderers, and those ridiculous tragic actors who appear to prepare powerful vocal projection but instead produce a feeble sound. Even when the performer has the physique du rôle, a voice that lacks projection is typical of someone who has not mastered the diaphragmatic support and the laryngeal control, and thus suffers from instability in pitch, resulting in unintended fluctuations and from poor clarity in articulation. Such a voice also lacks resonance. Ineffective technique prevents the use of resonating cavities, causing the sound to lose body and color, as in fact we have seen in Wanderers of Tarantos, the tragic actors and also Propides of Rhodes. Conversely, technique may produce an unbalanced and uncontrolled emission, as it is the case of the cycle bellowing. Thus, when vocal technique is poor or incorrect, the resulting sound may acquire qualities recalling animal voices. We already saw. While the pitch suggests a thin and breathless emission, the ox and donkey evoke the vocal excesses of those who confuse loudness with expressive power. A voice that exceeds its proper measure becomes sheer noise, an eruption of volume that overwhelms the artistic and performative dimension. Among the anecdotes reported by Marco about Stratonimus, the ineptitude of the Kitharod cleon is the subject of a pointed and animal-themed satire. Cleon was a Kitharod named Ox, who sang terribly off pitch, shamefully abusing his lyre. Having heard him to the end, Stratonimus remarked, "We used to have a proverb about us and the lyre." Simone will teach us about it. But now it's the ox and the lyre. In both ancient and modern imagination, comparison with a donkey carries unmistakable content. A singer incapable of modulating the voice may be compared to a donkey producing harsh, broken sound. In a Stratonimus joke, Cleon is compared to an ox, in reference to a performance that is anything but euphonious. The association with a deep, guttural bellow suggests a forced, cavernous sound lacking clarity. The correspondence between Cleon's braying, his bovine utterance, and the song of Polyphemus in Lucian is particularly noteworthy. So the donkey-lyre pairing is a well-known proverbial motive. The donkey hearing the lyre stands for a course of an obtuse individual who, like the donkey, unable to appreciate music, turns away from the harmonious melody of the instrument. In Cleon's case, the traditional proverb is reworked so that his voice is equated with the bray of a donkey, the unpleasant vocalization par excellence, while the image of the ox evokes the heaviness and rustic inelegance and uncultivated of a performer. This dual comparison of Cleon to both ox and donkey symbolizes his incapacity and lack of musical discernment, akin to the stereotypical Boeotians, whose very name, Boar, Ota, ox ears, was proverbial for dullness and cultural ineptitude. Central to this source is the verb apado, which Marcon uses to convey the unpleasantness of singing that strays both from proper voice production and from the melodic. A close review of the occurrences of apado, however, shows that this verb has a semantic range that is multifaceted. It applies to solo and choral contexts alike, where the primary sense is to sing off-key, and coexists with the broader nuances that point to an overall anomaly affecting every parameter of vocal performance. The preverb apo signals distance, but by extension also opposition, marking a breach in the very act of singing. So the ways in which this divergence manifests itself and the degree of deviation implied are clarified by context and by the verbs habitual pairing with other lexical variants. Accordingly, apado stands in polar relation to parodeo, while the performer denotes distance, singing out of tune. Parodeo instead literally signifies to sing alongside. and refers to singing at the octave, that is in close adjacency to the melodic line. It should further be noted that appado is often deployed in figurative imagery, where the musical discourse transcends the technical sphere and acquires also ethical imagery, also political resonance. It is used, first of all, by Plato to articulate the notion of what is pregnant, what is fitting or appropriate in the shaping of musical awareness. It is also used by Plutarch, for example, in the case of choral singing. And also appado applies to instrumental music, particularly distinguishing meaning of appado appears in the second Tarsian of Dio Chrysostom, who applies it in the context of instrumental music to craft and metaphor for omonia, the concord, while reflecting on ideals of good governance and civic virtue. So, social harmony, Dio argues, cannot be sustained in the absence of cooperation among individual members in pursuit of the common good. When such concord is lacking, the result resembles a group of instruments playing together without having first been tuned, either individually or in relation to one another. And so we have here the anarmoschia, the discordance, which is a condition primarily associated with the stringed instruments and arises when they have not been tuned prior to performance. It is accompanied by ametria, the disproportion of rhythmic figures played on the lyre, and the general failure of intonation. So Dio is describing here how the instrument, they can sound momentarily in agreement by a mere chance, but promptly lapse back into dissonance. And he uses appado to describe this. Another use of the verb appado, again instrumental, connected so to the ineptitude of the instrumental performance, but still different, appears in the Imagines of Philostratus the Younger. The depiction of Marsyas focuses on the moment in which the Phrygian becomes fully aware of his defeat and his punishment that will follow. Standing beside the pine tree, Marsyas awaits his fate and reflects upon the hubris of a challenge that has sealed his fate. Apollo has bested him, and now retribution awaits. The aulos, the instrument for both his fame and his downfall, has been cast aside, for it proved unworthy of divine music. So in this specific context, the use of appado may not pertain strictly to the acoustic quality of the sound produced, but rather it points to the atinia. Marsyas' art, in its entirety, has been found inferior in the contest with the body, and thus it is unfit to uphold so presumptuous of a challenge. Beyond the sphere of instrumental music, further attestations of appado arise in the context of choral performance. And we can find them in Plutarch again, and also in Aristides. But another paradigmatic example that I want to present here is the usage again of appado in a vivid choral scene that opens the second book of the Imagines, where Philostratus the Elder, in the form of an emphasis, celebrates the power of art, not only to represent what can be seen, but to evoke the sound and vitality of its characters. A modest Aphrodite is depicted within a sacred grove of Myrtiles, and the young maidens encircle the ivory statue of the goddess, singing hymns. The leading chorister is described in detail, still young, but with the faint trace of a wrinkle that lends gravity to her beauty, signaling her experience and maturity in guiding the chorus. So skillfully rendered is the painting that one seems almost to hear the voices of the maidens. They are singing a hymn, and the effect is so lifelike that even the gestures of the chorus leader, who appears to be correcting a younger singer who has fallen out of tune, seems to come alive before the viewer's eyes. Accordingly, the artistry of painting must be praised. Secondly, because it even makes us hear the hymn. For the maidens are singing, and the chorist fronts, and one who is off the key, clapping her hands and trying to earnestly bring her into tune. So the detail adds movement and dramatic realism to the composition, suggesting that the painting captures a leading, breathing moment. The leader, impatient clapping gesture are meant to restore both the intonation and rhythm in the inexperienced girl's performance. And so in this passage, the verb appado refers specifically to choral singing, encompassing both melodic deviation but also rhythmic inaccuracy. The last document that I would like to present here very briefly makes a pair in terms of opposites with the panther singing that we observed at the beginning of our journey. In the lives of the sophists, philosophers condense Varus of Laodicea and otherwise obscure sophists for a declamatory style that literally burst on singing. His style was reproached for spoiling a beautiful vocal tone with sudden melodic tones, campai asmaton, suited to Licenzius' orchestral accompaniment. And here asma appears to denote a sung manner, and campe denotes continuous variations introducing dissonant modulations, often ascending to a high register involving twists between harmonies. This technique linked to adjusting strings instrument with a tuning peg, the pischero, is explained by the pseudo-Plutarch in the De Musica. So, in conclusion, my attempt here to analyze the flows of the singing style has highlighted the anomalies that undermine both the technical quality and the stylistic coherence of a musical performance. The contrast between the virtuosity of the ideal singer and the incompetence of the mediocre one demonstrates that vocal performance must be grounded in rigorous technical training and a command of multiple interconnected elements. Precision in vocal control, careful articulation of the text, and proper coordination between vocal and instrumental components are all essential for achieving a performance marked by balance and appropriateness. Moreover, the opposition between tuneful and off-key singing pertains not merely to pleasantness to the ear, but rather signals a transgression of the fundamental principle of harmony, melodic structure, and rhythmic proportion. However, it is precisely from sound perception that a specific vocabulary emerges, aimed at identifying and denouncing various deficiencies in vocal performance, both solo and choral. The evolution of this lexicon reflects broader cultural and conceptual shifts. The redefinition of pre-existing terms serves as a revealing indicator of how a society interprets itself and its transformation. As Eleonora Bocconi has shown in studies on the development of technical and musical terminology, such a linguistic apparatus begins to take shape alongside the emergence of abstract reflection on musical styles, concepts, and rules. Lacking an autonomous vocabulary, music is thus compelled to develop one, often drawing from everyday language or applying semantic shifts. As in other technical domains, the development of musical vocabulary in the sphere of singing relies on a process of lexical resemantization tied to the growth of musical theory. Terms describing the voice often derive from material language, linking the sound to tactile sensation, or from animal vocalizations to evoke strained or dissonant timbres, apodos, apetes. Notably, vocal folds are sometimes identified through litotes, which, by negating the opposite, emphasize musical excellence while marking deviations from it. Then the verb apparo. In that lies one of the core of my analysis. Beyond denoting mere off-pitch singing, it signals a broader divergence affecting voice, rhythm, and tonality, marking a rupture in melodic rhythmic continuity and a detachment from a melody and the sphere of the arts, amusos, apomusos. When applied to instrumental music, it refers to imbalance and sonic dissonance. So rhythmic inaccuracy, whether in the misalignment between voice and instrument or among choral parts, undermines the overall cohesion of the performance, revealing that musical fault lies not only in pitch, but also in temporal disjunction and structural incoherence. The lexical analysis of vocal flows also encompasses timbre. A weak or overly thin voice lacks the necessary power and resonance, while a harsh, heavy voice pushes the sound unnaturally in the throat, lactose, tracheus, aphonous, cacophonous. So these issues are compounded by poor articulation and modulation, essential elements for melodic coherence. Insufficient control and breath support and placement in the maschera results in an unpleasant tone and involuntary pitch variation, plein-mêlée, so disrupting the flow of the performance through abrupt breaks and instability. Such excesses and deficiencies are not mere technical lapses, but fundamental flaws that undermine the singer's authority and credibility, often exposing them to ridicule and even formal sanctions, the weak expulsion from the stage. So the analysis that I wanted to conduct identifies key vocal defects, intonation errors, weak timbre, poor modulation, and flawed rhythmic textual articulation, whose absence defines an ideal performance standard. There is an epigraphic evidence that, despite lexical divergences, confirms this ideal. This is an inscription for Stratum from Despi, and it speaks about the singing virtuosities of an altos. And here, the literary terminology, the epigraphical terminology is different, but reflects the link between technique and evolving stylistic awareness in Greek culture, showing how vocal flows shift sound perception and aesthetic evaluation in terms of style and musical taste. Thank you for your attention.
you, Angela. That was great. Very interesting discussion of perhaps the most difficult, the most precious, the most tricky area of ancient perception. We're speaking about vocal performance, and even nowadays, when we read, you know, an article, newspaper about the vocal performance, it's difficult to actually understand what the musical critic listen to, and it's not always so easy to understand through words the real experience of someone listening to a singer. And thank you for putting all these sources, which are tremendously interesting, against the backdrop of a theoretical reflection on what makes a voice beautiful to listen to or terrible, dreadful. So I would like to, I would ask to the audience the questions, because it's a very stimulating topic.
I would like to thank Angela for a very interesting and dense talk. I've written down many things I'm going to develop for myself, also because you even mentioned the passage I have recently dealt with in Vilnius, a conference organized by Sharunas. My question is exactly on the epigraph you discussed right now, this one.
Yes.
Because since it was at the beginning, and I read this, my question is, who is speaking in this epigraph? I don't understand the subject.
It's the price.
It's the price?
Fee.
Oh, okay. The price. Is it normal that yeah, okay.
It's not really yes. And he describes the skills of this stratum from Teschi. And it is striking. I didn't develop on this because I thought it was really very long my talk. But I think that this passage here is striking. No, even though it is fragmentary, you know, the it's interesting, no, how the tobun here is described. No? Eu prosagnosas. No? He is an aulodos. This is reconstructed. Others reconstructed melodos. But Alessandra maybe can confirm in test here we don't have complications of melodo, so aulodos makes sense. And so he sings in the accompaniment of the aulos that you were showing, and he perfectly does it with the right rhythm, metrical cadence, and also his perfection in his voice is perfectly suitable to that kind of performance. So also there is the trepon here that Plato shows us. So yes, and also what is striking is that this is very early compared to the other sources that I showed today, no? Because I could find, in my examples of the flows of vocal flows, this it was all pushed towards the Greco-Roman world, towards the AD section, no? But I couldn't find so much material apart from Plato, Aristotle, of course, but on the description of the daily life of anecdotes, I could find much more instead in the 2nd century AD.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On this, thank you for but is this a block, the stone?
The what?
The support, the inscription.
I don't know actually. Maybe Alessandra.
It's a stone.
It's a stone, it's a block, it's a stele. I don't know. I have to read your book.
No. I think it is a description also on the stone which on which the price.
Ah,
The price
So
of
it should be a weight on the price and not on the stone.
yes. No, it's a, I think it's a stone. I have to check. We can check the
Yeah, we'll check.
Yes, let's check it. Yes.
the winner of the prize of Ologia in the Musea of Testi.
Sì. And so, you know, the terminology is the same, is different, but the concepts of the rhythm, the prephoneme, and also the vocality are the same. Sì.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. All the talk of the voices, the comparison between good sound, bad sound, ideas in this perspective. And it's very interesting for me that the alteration or the distortion of the sound is considered as a bad thing for the voice. And I'm asking, maybe it's a really good beginning to make a compare research of the voice is the same also for the instruments, because many instruments, also the lay instruments, has distorted sound or alterate sound or techniques. Is that a reality, considered a good reality or a bad reality together with the voice? I'm thinking about the togetherness, the insieme, or the harmonia. Very, very interesting. Beginning to a thought of research.
Yeah, it can be extended actually, I think, to you know,
The
the terminological study of the flows. No? Apontos, apeques, I think, no?
This distortion or aphono, paraphono, euphano, it's also considered the same thing. I think so. Also for the sound of the instrument, not only the voice, if the voice is considered like that.
And also, you know, it was surprising. Sorry for surprising for me to see while Massimo was presenting that what I found about the aphonia, about you know these ruptures in the breath, for example, they are described here in daily life in anecdotes. Instead, we have them in theory in what you were showing, with a different terminology again, but still the effect is the same.
Yes, I think it's been significant that this kind of observation belongs to the school of Aristotle, which has a more empirical approach to reality in comparison, for example, to Plato and the Platonists. I don't think it's by chance that I think there is a link between what people could observe in theaters every day. So imagine after a performance, people discussing, I like this, I don't like that, and why is that, and I think that philosophers, especially in the school of Aristotle, I think of Theophrastus and Aristoxenus for that matter, were very interested in understanding why the judges tended to award a certain kind of performance and not another. Because, as has been noticed, in a race, it's easy to say, okay, you reached the end of the game before, you were weaker than your opponent, you won the race. There is no doubt about a race or a fight. Last man standing wins. But in music, it's not so easy to tell who is a better singer.
You see, there is here the kairos, no?
Kairos, yes.
Not the prephonal flat. I think that every context maybe has something that is requested. Maybe different in every context, no? And they surely they certainly well aware about that. And so we need to distinguish the objective flows and what was out of line in the context. I think.
And of course, all these things are cultural because the partial lack of intonation is or reaching a specific pitch not at once but gradually is a key element in blues. For example, when you sing blues, you don't sing the note right in its correct pitch at the beginning. You reach that note. You start a little lower, and then you have people expecting that. But in that particular aesthetic, in jazz, in blues, there is a certain aesthetic of singing. The ancient Greeks, apparently, because we all know what we are told, so according to certain theorists, the better way of singing was to be perfectly clear about the pitch from the beginning to the start.
So this is a fact.
This is a fact.
And also, in this passage of the Negrinus, when Lucian says that these actors, they speak in a voice that is smoking womanish, but still they have this open eyes and this open mouths. Behind the masks, you can read a little hint of technique. The fact that as for the singing technique, they used to open their mouth and the palate, but nothing happened because there was not the right the right pushing from the diaphragm, and so the voice flows.
Have you found any specific reference to diaphragm?
No.
To this kind of respiration?
No.
We don't have that.
No, not in the.
No, because neither did I. But
Yes.
that's why I was asking.
Yes, but you can, for example, in the aphonia, you can, what I showed about the fact that it is not silent, but it's a little, you have the effect and not the process, I think, yes.
Okay.
I have the answer.
Yes,
The block is of limestone, and it was actually reused in a chapel. The chapel I have here.
in the world.
But yes, in the world. But now it is in the Museum of Thieves. But that's a basis.
It's a piece, so this is
But actually, I have a very small question on Storico-Archeologico on this series. That's quite surprising that he uses Corinthian for the thematic of agonist, because we should expect Delphi. So, according to me, it's because he wants us to have a series of cities, and for Delphi, it's the architecture. But maybe you have another explanation?
No, because I have no other information because this is an indirect quotation, so we don't have the continuation of the quotation. Maybe it was something longer, we don't know.
So I have a couple of small remarks, just things of a kind of bookworm. And in that passage from the Imagines, when there were those girls singing with their didascalos, I was wondering, these verbs like apado and plemeleo, even if they refer to ado, melos, so to singing one may think of melody, they also apply to rhythm, I guess.
Yes.
Because in that case, by clapping your hands, you get not in tune, but in the correct rhythm. Yes.
Both of the things. So apado applies to both the rhythm and the tones.
Yes. And I was wondering if in problem 21, if you have considered reading with reference to rhythm instead of the received lecture various, perhaps speaking of rhythm, Renash had suggested correcting me to Bradutero. Yes, I think it's, of course, it's a conjecture, because it's not the received text. The testimonies are concordant, unanimous. It's a concordant tradition. It's just, but I think it works because it's difficult to be out, because he already talked about melody earlier, and then about rhythm in the same way as your flow, your mistake is more noticeable if you sing in the low register. Low register comes from slowness.
Yes.
So even in rhythm, when you are in slow rhythm, your mistake is more noticeable. So it tends to reason. It was a lecture, a conjecture by
Thank you.
So I think we can close this session here, and thank again Angela for this beautiful paper. And so we will reconvene here at 4:30 with Anna Maria Russo's papers. I must tell you that Anna Maria Russo won't be here, and so I will be reading her paper. So you have to imagine that I am Anna Maria Russo, which takes a lot of imagination, but this is what it is. So, yeah, in disguise, yes. So I'll see you this afternoon. Thank you, Glenn.
Can I say something? Before we leave, would we have a picture all together? Because I know that Simone is leaving, so maybe since we are all there, we can have a picture all together. Yes. Yes, but I don't know, just you decide. Maybe we ask something. Chiediamo questo, possiamo chiedere se ci fa una foto insieme, ce la fa, grazie. Possiamo magari solo che vuole chiedere una foto. Sì, no, perché che stai andando, sì, no, infatti
quella di Vito, quella di Vito, molto carina, quella del... però poi io ho visto Laura fa, non quella che abbiamo fatto, no,
devo vedere un po'.
tutti i cori che abbiamo fatto, una sotto casa, sai che c'era un momento abbiamo fatto
Adesso vedo, non lo so cosa mi hanno mandato. Anche per lo strumento, non lo so. Dopo lo chiediamo, c'è una, please, you remember where we had Simone was saying that we got only the one we did in the room, in the big room. But isn't there what we had someone under the course?
In riunione, grazie Maria, con il capo area. Quindi ce la facciamo.
Ce la fa lei? Ce la può fare? Allora venga anche lei che la facciamo tutti insieme. No, non le piacciono le foto, no, basta.
Non vuole comparire, va bene.
Allora basta fare. La facciamo con la mia, e dopo la mandiamo. Ce la fa, va bene, ma pensavo che volesse venire, per questo che abbiamo chiamato. Aspetta, c'è
Dove ci mettiamo?
sì, certo. Facciamo una
Professore si raddrizzi
ci mettiamo tutti insieme che facciamo una foto. Dove ci mettiamo? Ci mettiamo c'è lo screen del convegno, la cosa del convegno, del seminario, la
candina. Sì, si può fare. Sì, c'era, l'avevo aperta.
c'era
Sul flyer? Sì, dovrebbe essere quello. Sì, sì.
Sì, vediamo la scherma intera.
Sì, perfetto.
Ci mettiamo intorno a questo se credete, cosa dite? Mettiamoci qua.
Va bene, potete.
No, io ho scosciato.
Sì, però si vede poi tutto.
Ah, si vede l'ombra, lei dice.
Si vede l'ombra, professore. Sì, se vi mettete così, sì.
Non ci stiamo tutti.
Eh sì, è un po' difficile.
Allora,
Allora mettetevi se no voi tre di là e la facciamo vicino ai cippi. Vicino ai cippi, alle colonne ai cippi. Che c'è il cono di luce almeno devo fare meglio. Spostate poco tutte alla sinistra di più. Sì, perché sennò si vede se no fa tutto.
No, sì,
Raddrizzatevi il page di stato così almeno si vede, se no si vede tutta quella patina bianca.
Grazie.
sei venuta male?
Vabbè, allora la facciamo all'ingresso della sala,
Vediamo se questo signore che è un professionista. Prego.
Facciamo un altro.
Allora, dove ci mettiamo? Secondo lei dove ci mettiamo?
Forse conviene di qua che c'è la luce davanti.
Abbiamo molto bella. Sì, no, insomma, infatti riprendiamo a che ora?
Alle 4:30.
Alle 4:30? Sì, grazie, grazie. Grazie a voi. Grazie. Adesso ve la mando. Poi dopo magari una volta mi mandi il tuo adesso lo chiedo, il tuo coso. Via. Allora,
Sì.
fai in tempo che non mangiare di qualcosa, forse no. Ma non ti puoi prendere
Sì, lasciamola così.
andiamo da schifo, andiamo a prendere una cosa che la sorti via.
Se rustico metta portiere. Devo mettere i pasticcioni e portare a casa.
Va bene, dai, andiamo
Rustico take away. Vabbè, le cose le lasciare qua.
Ah, dici? È così.
ma non solo lì.
Sì, no, solo.
Sono temi che vedere, ma penso che siano state di tasse, di tasse
Sì, l'aeroporto a capo che mangiare dire vista a Cinalli che era un paese caldo e c'era un articolo in cui
cioè a Zurigo un caffè costa 7 euro,
Svizzera costa
in Svizzera è sempre
4 euro
perché una volta che hanno preso Swiss quando sono andato al mattino sono andato a prendere un caffè 8 euro. Va bene, riandiamo che così dopo poi andiamo a andare. Sì, stiamo
Pasticcio. Non riesco, però riesco a chiudere.
Io sono molto usato in questo dietro per questo.
Sono contento di avere una digitale. Ma tu i grossi problemi li hai visti?
Però, veramente,
Quando un giorno ho comprato la busta in Sicilia, salve, da Torino, mi messo nel Salento, il protetista, salve. Sì, dovevo finire un po' di cose, ho studiato tutte queste intese, mi toccava, quindi sono benissimo. La ringrazio, finalmente dopo tanti mesi. Quindi, volevo dire, essendo allenatore, perché l'altro allenatore, non so come è praticamente dovremmo incontrarci con tutto il mezzo lunedì, non so se lei è disponibile lunedì alle 10:30 della mattina. Sì, io ho provato a contattarla giorni fa, però non sono riuscito. Alle 10:30. Alle 10:30. sfera semplice. Allora, come sono queste sì, infatti, ci sarà anche un altro docente, come esterno, e mi sta dando una mano giusto perché comunque tratterò, sperando che sia utile, nelle culture materiali e in relazione alla distruzione Claudio Giardino, è un make-up metallurgo. Sì, no, su questa ragione, infatti anche il professore diceva praticamente come solo anni fa, diceva invia tutti i docenti coinvolti questa rete in una bozza di così l'avevo pensato, però il problema è che è definito di entro fine settimana al massimo però sì, era la comunità istituzionale, però sì, un indice provvisorio. Sì, allora poi sì, io le posso, certo, io le posso anticipare così, brevemente le richieste principali che voi comunque sviluppare, sono tutti poi intercollegati. Praticamente, allora, prima la si potrebbe ispirare la cronologia senza di questa funzione dell'unità in Europa. Quindi la cronologia, poi la distribuzione, cioè praticamente dove si distribuisce quando ciò accade, soprattutto poi spiegare in seconda battuta l'area d'origine o perlomeno un'area che comunque viene attraversata perché l'elemento usato si possa intervenire in Europa. Cioè, quando è entrato da dove e soprattutto c'era già oppure era solo una rinforzo. Diciamo sostanzialmente questo. Poi un problema da concludere è rappresentato ormai nelle scienze di sapere dall'uomo di comando. Qual è la differenza tra Sara e Stroani? Mi sente?